Hi, would you like to listen to some horror stories narrated by one of the few female narrators on YouTube? If yes, then you've come to the right place. Because I, Lady Novelist, will read you 3 night drive horror stories that will make your blood run cold. It's my voice, human, imperfect, but special in its own way, so I hope you'll stick around to listen to my stories. If you like them, don't forget to give me a like and subscribe to my channel. I've prepared 3 stories for you, but the last one is really special, so please stay with me until the end and listen carefully. I should have known better than to travel that night. I should have trusted the weight in my chest, the tightness in my throat. But duty called. I was a nurse, and when the hospital assigned me to a professional development course 500 kilometers from home, I had no choice but to go. My husband arranged for his driver Marius to take me there. It was winter, and the roads were treacherous, but Marius was experienced, or so I believed. We left late, much later than I wanted to. The hospital had kept me longer than expected, and by the time I got into the car, the sun had already begun its descent. A dense fog rolled in as we drove out of the city, swallowing the road, the trees, the world itself. The headlights cut through the mist like weak candles, barely illuminating the asphalt ahead. The further we went, the quieter the world became. No cars, no lights, nothing but the eerie glow of our headlights bouncing off the thick fog. "Strange," Marius muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. "This road should be busier." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The silence pressed in, thick and unnatural. I clutched my rosary, whispering a prayer under my breath. Marius drove on, the car slicing through the night like a lone boat on a black sea. The road signs became less frequent, the villages fewer and farther between. Then something changed. The road twisted in ways I didn't recognize. The trees on either side loomed taller, their dark, bare branches reaching towards us like skeletal fingers. I peered at Marius, his expression stiff, his jaw clenched. "Are we lost?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he exhaled through his nose and tightened the grip on the wheel. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "This doesn't feel right." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "I know this route," he said, eyes darting across the road as if searching for something familiar. "But it's different tonight. It shouldn't be this empty." I looked outside again. The mist had thickened, swallowing the trees, the road, everything beyond a few meters ahead. The fog wasn't natural. It clung to the car, curled around it like it was alive, like it wanted us to stay lost forever. I closed my eyes and whispered another prayer, the words tumbling from my lips in frantic devotion. Then, suddenly, a figure appeared on the side of the road. Marius slammed the brakes. The tires screeched against the wet road, and my breath hitched in my throat. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. A woman stood there, pale against the darkness, draped in a flowing white dress. Her hair cascaded down her back in long, tangled waves. She didn't move. She didn't shiver despite the freezing air. Her face was obscured by the fog, but I knew she was looking at us. A lump formed in my throat. "Marius," I whispered. "We have to take her." He turned to me sharply. "What? Are you insane? We're already lost. We don't need—" "Please," I interrupted, gripping my rosary so tight the beads bit into my palm. "Look at her. She needs help." He hesitated, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Then, exhaling heavily, he reached over and unlocked the door. The woman moved without hesitation. Her steps were soundless as she approached. She opened the door and slid into the back seat without a word. A cold draft followed her, slithering into the car, settling in my bones. Marius glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "Where are you going?" he asked. The woman's voice was barely above a whisper. "Near the monastery." Marius hesitated, then nodded and started driving again. The moment we moved, the fog began to clear. The dense, suffocating mist peeled away, revealing the road ahead, the trees, the sky. It was as if something had been holding us back, keeping us trapped in an endless loop, and now it was letting us go. I turned in my seat to look at our passenger. She sat still, hands folded neatly in her lap, her face unreadable. My skin prickled. Something about her unsettled me, yet I felt no fear, only a strange, quiet reverence. No one spoke for the rest of the journey. The car hummed through the now clear road, the dark countryside rolling past us. Then, in the distance, I saw it. The monastery, its silhouette outlined by the pale moonlight. As we neared, the woman reached for the door handle. "Thank you," she murmured. Before I could respond, she stepped out. The cold rushed in as she disappeared into the darkness, her white dress blending into the night. I watched her go, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, as she neared the monastery's gate, she vanished, not walked away, not faded into the distance, vanished. I gasped. Marius swore under his breath, crossing himself. I squeezed my rosary, lips trembling. "Drive," I whispered. "Now." He didn't need to be told twice. He pressed the accelerator and we sped away, the monastery shrinking behind us. We arrived at my destination safely. The roads remained clear, the journey smooth. When we finally reached the small inn where I was staying, Marius killed the engine and turned to me, face pale as death. "We picked up a ghost, didn't we?" I looked down at my rosary, the beads warm now, as if they had absorbed my fear. "I don't know," I admitted, "but whatever she was, she helped us." Marius nodded slowly. "Then let's pray we never meet her again." I agreed, but deep in my heart I knew. She hadn't been lost. She had been waiting. I remember that night as if it were yesterday. Some memories blur with time, soften at the edges, but not this one. This one is carved into my mind like an epitaph on a gravestone, sharp and unyielding. I was 18, young and reckless, with a brand new driver's license and the kind of confidence that only comes from inexperience. But that night, I learned what it meant to truly be afraid. It was past midnight when I left the club. My friends had decided to stay longer, but I was tired, and the thought of my own bed was more appealing than another round of drinks. The road home stretched out before me, about 30 kilometers of mostly empty highway. But there was one part I dreaded, the forest. A long winding stretch of road cutting through dense ancient trees that loomed like silent sentinels on either side. I had always hated driving through it, especially at night. The darkness there was different, thicker, pressing in like unseen hands. Still, I had no choice but to go through. The music in my car was low, and my fingers tapped anxiously on the steering wheel as I tried to ignore the eerie isolation. My headlights illuminated the road ahead, but beyond that, nothing but darkness. The further I drove, the more I felt something, an unease creeping up my spine like cold fingers. Then the car jerked, a sudden violent lurch that sent my stomach plummeting. The steering became heavy, and a sickening thump-thump-thump echoed beneath me. A flat tire. My heart hammered as I pulled over to the side of the road, the trees pressing in on either side like a living wall. I swallowed hard, my breath shaky. I didn't dare get out, not here, not in the middle of the forest, in the middle of the night. Instead, I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers and called my dad. He picked up after just 2 rings. his voice groggy but alert when he heard my panicked explanation. "Stay in the car, lock the doors. I'm coming." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Please hurry." "I will." The call ended and silence swallowed me whole. I locked the doors, double-checked them, and curled into my seat, my eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the darkness beyond my windshield. The only sound was my own breath and the occasional rustling of leaves. Minutes passed. The wind whispered through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. Then something moved. A shadow, shifting just beyond the reach of my headlights. My breath hitched. It could have been an animal, a deer maybe, but as I squinted into the darkness, something emerged. A man. He stepped into the dim glow of my headlights, his clothes rumpled, his stance unsteady. He looked drunk, or worse. His face was gaunt, eyes hollow, and his lips curled into something that might have been a smile. I froze. Then he knocked on my window. Not a gentle knock, but a heavy, deliberate thud-thud. I shook my head, gripping the steering wheel as if it could protect me. His smile widened, revealing teeth that looked too white in the darkness. He knocked again, harder this time. My whole body tensed, every nerve screaming for me to do something, anything, but I just sat there, paralyzed. Then the knocking turned to pounding. The whole car shook. I gasped, my hands fumbling for the horn. Desperation overtook fear, and I pressed down, the sound blaring through the night. The window cracked. A spiderweb of fractures spread across the glass like veins. My breath hitched, and I slammed my hand against the horn again, the noise drowning out the rush of blood in my ears. Then, headlights. Distant at first, but growing brighter. A car was coming. The man's eyes flicked towards the approaching lights, his expression twisting. And then, without warning, he bolted. Not down the road, not towards the light, but straight into the woods, vanishing into the trees like he had never been there at all. A moment later, my dad's truck skidded to a stop behind my car, his headlights cutting through the darkness. The relief was so overwhelming that I nearly cried. I threw the door open, sprinting towards him. "Are you okay?" His hands were firm on my shoulders, eyes scanning me for injuries. I nodded, words failing me. I just pointed towards the woods. But there was nothing. No sign of the man, no footprints. Just the whispering trees and the shattered glass of my window. My dad changed my tire, and we left quickly, but I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing at the tree line, watching, waiting. I never saw him again, but sometimes, when I drive alone at night, I still hear it. The road stretched endlessly before us, dark and desolate, swallowed by the black abyss of the countryside. The laughter and chatter from the wedding party still echoed in our minds, but the night felt different now, quieter, heavier, as if the world beyond the car windows had ceased to exist. Mira sat in the back seat, staring at the empty road ahead. Beside her, Jake, half asleep, murmured something incoherent. Up front, Kyle drove, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel, while I scrolled through my phone, frowning at the lack of reception. "I told you we should have filled up before we left," Kyle muttered, eyes darting to the fuel gauge. The needle hovered dangerously close to empty. "There's a gas station coming up," Mira said, spotting the faded sign ahead. Kyle flicked on the turn signal and pulled into the dimly lit lot. The gas station was old. Too old. The fluorescent lights buzzed, barely illuminating the cracked pavement. The pumps looked ancient, with rust creeping along their edges. A faded sign on the roof read Fuller's Gas and Goods, but the letters were worn, barely legible. It was as if we had stepped back in time. "This place is a relic," Jake muttered as we got out. "Maybe it's some kind of retro thing," I offered, though I didn't sound convinced. The gas station looked very, very strange. As we walked inside, the air grew thick with the scent of dust and aged wood. A small TV sat on the counter, playing a grainy black and white broadcast of an old talk show. The host's eyes were unnervingly wide, his voice distorted by static. A corded rotary phone rested beside the register, its plastic yellowed with time. Behind the counter stood a man, motionless. He was tall and thin, his skin sallow under the flickering lights. His uniform was crisp but outdated, and his eyes, a murky shade of gray, held no warmth. He smiled, too wide, too forced. "Evening," he drawled, voice thick with something unnatural. "Long drive?" Yeah," Kyle said hesitantly, handing over his card. The man took it with skeletal fingers, his nails too long, too yellowed. A loud click echoed through the store as the man ran the card through an old manual credit card imprinter. The machine let out a slow, wheezing breath, as though struggling to function. "You kids be careful now," the man said as he handed back the card. His smile remained, unblinking. Something in Mira's stomach churned. She glanced at the man's hands. Were his fingers longer than before? Kyle muttered a thanks and hurried us out. As we climbed back into the car, Mira stole one last glance at the gas station. The cashier was still watching, still smiling. Kyle pulled onto the road, shaking his head. That was weird as hell. We all murmured in agreement, a shared unease settling over us. Then the headlights appeared. Mira noticed it first. A car trailing behind us, its engine a low guttural growl. "Is that—" I started, my voice trembling. Mira's breath hitched as she turned, her blood running cold. The driver. It was the cashier. His grin was still there, wide and frozen, as if carved into his face. Kyle accelerated. "What the hell?" The car behind us matched our speed. "He's following us," Jake whispered. He's toying with us." The cashier's car flicked off its headlights, vanishing into the darkness behind us. Then, a second later, we snapped back on, closer. Kyle swerved, trying to lose him, but the road was empty. No other cars, no exits, just endless asphalt and trees that seemed to close in around us. "We need to call the cops," I said, gripping my phone with shaking hands. "No service," Jake muttered. Then a ringing sound. Mira turned, her stomach twisting into knots. The rotary phone from the gas station was in our back seat. It sat on the seat beside her, its coiled cord stretching into nothingness. The phone rang again. Nobody moved. A third ring. Jake, as if possessed, reached out and picked up the receiver. A voice, garbled and distant, whispered through the line. "You shouldn't have left." Jake dropped the phone as if it burned him, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The moment it hit the seat, the headlights behind us vanished. For a second, there was nothing but silence. Then, sirens. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance. Mira exhaled, her body shaking with relief. The moment the police car came into view, the cashier's vehicle screeched, made a sharp U-turn and sped off into the darkness. When the officers pulled up, Kyle wasted no time explaining. But as they spoke, the officers exchanged wary glances. "There's no gas station on this road," one of them said. Mira's mouth went dry. Kyle shook his head. "No, we just stopped there." Fuller's Gas and Goods. One officer's face darkened. Son, Fuller's burned down 20 years ago. There hasn't been a station here since. I turned, looking at the dark road behind us. Nothing. No lights, no gas station, just empty road stretching into the abyss. And in the silence, I swore I could still hear it. The phone ringing. A call that would never be answered. Dear friends, our horror episode is over, and thank you for listening. I hate voices generated by artificial intelligence, and if you hate them too, then of course we can be friends. I'll let you go to sleep now, if you can, but not before I ask you to subscribe to my channel, because it shows me that human narrators are still appreciated. Good night.